my mum was admitted to the care home because she hadn't been taking her meds properly. She'd been mixing up meds and had had a bit of a breakdown. She had MS. She was getting on. 74, so not so pretty old. She was 72 when she went into the home. A couple of weeks prior to this all happening, I'd received an email from, I believe, her social worker, because I was responsible for dealing with all my mum's finances, etc., asking me to relinquish that, which I thought was quite strange. And I thought, well, they said it would be easier to sort finances and money out, and I kind of thought, well, no, I'm not handing over that power. It's, like the family spoke to my mum on the Sunday night. Wednesday, which was the 29th of April, she was put on end-of-life medication without me even being notified. I got an email, a random email from the home saying, can you call us, something to discuss, your mum's health, etc. Called up and found out on the Thursday that the day before she'd been taken off all food and water, put on end-of-life meds, and been read the last rites by a priest all the day before. A do not resuscitate form had been filled out. So all of this was done without my knowledge and my consent, and I was really freaked out. So I asked the main caregiver exactly what had gone on, what was the sequence of events that had led up to this, because she was fine on the Sunday, not even sick. They said she had had a bit of a chest infection, and they spoke to the doctor and they didn't think that antibiotics were going to be effective. They'd sent her to bed for a day, and she was coughing a lot because as she'd been laid flat, all the phlegm had sort of gathered on her chest. So we're not talking a dry COVID-y cough, we're talking about mucousy, wet chest infection. She was never tested for COVID at all. It was put COVID as cause of death on her death certificate, but she hadn't been tested for COVID, and the doctor who signed the death certificate signed it on his own. He'd never seen her, never even met her in person, and he hadn't even seen her medical notes properly, because when he telephoned me, he asked me what she'd been suffering from, and I discussed that she had multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis. So he put cause of death, COVID, multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis, because this is what I'd said. So I was told that she was put on some medication to make her calm. When I looked this medication up, it's actually a drug that's used in anaesthetics. This lasted a day, and then she was put on an end-of-life care package, which I asked the district nurse what that consisted of, and she told me it was hyoscine, morphine, midazolam. So she was taken off all food and water. I asked why this was, and they said that it was because she'd shown difficulty in swallowing. Now, basically, my mum suffered from multiple sclerosis. She used to walk with a bit of a limp, and I think it's maybe as much as 1/3 of people with multiple sclerosis at some point will have difficulty swallowing, because there's quite a lot of neurological processes involved in swallowing. And I noticed when I'd taken my mum away the year before, like sometimes when she was drinking water, she would choke a bit, and sometimes when she would eat, she would kind of turn to the side as she was swallowing. Multiple sclerosis is a disease that kind of is affected by the immune system. So it's not inconceivable that if she had had a bit of a bug or been a bit unwell, it would have made the multiple sclerosis symptoms worse. So, when I was suggested to both the care workers and the doctor, had anybody investigated this as part of the MS, I was just told flat broke no. The local GP, I asked, could somebody actually go in and see her? She hadn't been tested for COVID. I was told no doctors were allowed to go into the home. So none of the residents there, and I believe at least 8 of them there, had been put on end-of-life meds, and none of them were actually seen by a qualified doctor. It was not a nursing home, it was a care home. So it was led by untrained care workers who were all left to care for these elderly people who'd been put on the end-of-life meds, and they had a visit a couple of times a week from a district nurse. The doctor who signed the death certificate told me this was chaos. They were constantly phoning up going, what do we do about this? What do we do about this syringe driver? Kabla, kabla. So you essentially had untrained care workers who were delivering end-of-life care packages. As a result, things were not done properly. My mum was left in a bed. She had really bad bed sores. The district nurse came in, saw the bed sores and was like, she needs to be put on an airflow mattress. I was told that was going to happen. And 2 days later, she still hadn't been put on an airflow mattress because they said it would be more distressing to move her. And they said, well, we're turning her every couple of hours. And I'm like, shouldn't you have been doing that anyway? So as a result, my mum, who had a bit of a bug, which did not sound like a dry COVID cough, sounded like a wet chest infection, was put on end-of-life meds, stripped the right of food and drink, and left to die on her own in a bed. And my mum was very, very Catholic. Not my belief system, but it was very important to her. And you know, when she was not in the home, she would go to church every day. So having the last rites from a priest would have been a really big thing for her. And by heck, you know, there's people in prison for murder and stuff who get the last rites, you know, and she was delivered that over the telephone by a priest. She was not allowed to speak to any of the family. She died on her own in what I can describe a very cold and horrible way. I phoned the police initially and explained to them that a do not resuscitate form had been signed without my consent, that she'd been put on these medications without my knowledge or consent, and they told me this is a civil matter. We can't deal with this. So I tried to contact the Quality Care Commission, couldn't get any joy with them, so I reported the home to social services. Social services started an investigation. I spoke to a social worker called Annette from East Renfrewshire Social Services. She contacted the home and said, you know, that a do not resuscitate form has been filled out without family's consent or knowledge. The home then essentially lied and said that was not the case, that I'd got the information wrong and that hadn't happened. That was proven to be a lie because on the medical notes it was stated that when she had been put on the end-of-life care package, they'd obtained a do not resuscitate form from the GP. I'm very well aware that an elderly person who is not very well, like the whole resus process, you know, there are times when it's appropriate and not appropriate. And I know that, you know, sometimes if people are elderly and fragile, resuscitating them wouldn't be a good thing. I don't think that was the intention in this case. You know, I think the intention was that we are going to put her on these medications and she's not coming out the other side, you know. And I spoke to the doctor. I asked, you know, can you go in? Can you see her? And the doctor had said, oh, well, you never know, she might perk up. And I said, well, I can't see how she's going to perk up because I'm young, fit and healthy. And if you put me on, I've looked up what hyoscine, midazolam, morphine, etc. are and what they do. And these are basically, some of them, anaesthetic drugs that take people into a low level of consciousness. You know, like when someone has an anaesthetic, they're so many layers deeper than being asleep. And I think it proves that she was actually quite healthy, that she managed to last a week on this stuff. And I think the thing that finally did it for me was when the doctor phoned up about a day after she died to discuss with me what had to be put on the death certificate. You know, I had a conversation with him and I was like, I just want answers. You know, I've been fighting and battling with people all week, you know, for reporting the home to social services. I've had no end of flack from the care home staff. They've been really horrid to me. Like, what's going on? Who's responsible for this? And the things that he was saying to me, I was really shocked. I'm a musician, and so I always have dictaphones lying around for songwriting purposes, and I literally ran around my bedroom and grabbed a dictaphone because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And he essentially told me that our government was responsible for what had happened, that they had passed legislation, that they were telling the doctors not to send anybody over 65 into the COVID hubs. You know, these COVID hubs had been designed for people with COVID, and they were told to refuse that right to people over 65. And in the doctor's words, they were told to leave them at home, neglect them and leave them to die. They were also being told to sign these end-of-life care packages. And he said, you know, it really was in opposition to their Hippocratic oath, that he really felt not good about what he was being asked to do. And he said he felt like the government was trying to silence them. He said he and a group of other doctors had signed a petition to try and stand out in opposition to this, but they were very much being suppressed. Despite the fact that what she clearly died of was malnutrition and an overdose, COVID was put as the cause of death. So her death then went to the tally of COVID deaths, when clearly she died of an overdose from an end-of-life care package. I hate that term, end-of-life care package, you know, because there's no caring whatsoever in what happened. I feel like this is murder, and I feel like it's premeditated murder, because all the end-of-life packages were pre-ordered, and as we were being put into lockdown, being told it was to protect our old people, you know, people like my mum were being put on end-of-life care packages, and people over the age of 65 were being turned away from COVID hubs and turned away from medical treatment. And my boss was working at a local doctor's surgery here, and when I told her the story of what happened with my mum, she said it was the same at their surgery. They were being told, so we've got this happening in Scotland, all the way down here in Cornwall. She said they were being told to turn people away who were over 65 years of age and to leave them at home and neglect them. So there is what's happening in the media and the propaganda, and there's what's happening behind the curtain. And I want somebody to be accountable for what has gone on, because it completely and utterly violates the Human Rights Act of 98. You know, Article 2, right to life. I mean, straight off. How can we have laws that have been in place for hundreds of years to protect us suddenly, overnight, be not respected and violated by a bill that is brought in and not put through Parliament? If anybody, and I'm going to name names, the home that my mum was in was Bonington House in Glasgow. Anybody who's working at that care home, if you have a conscience, please come forward and say something. Really, you absolutely have an obligation to come forward and to start talking about what was going on, what you were seeing, because I know from speaking to people, I'm not the only person this has happened to.